We said at the outset that all of these 8 feelings are neutral to good. Like there's no 7 bad ones and 1 good one, but they're all good because we walk through the doorway of the vulnerabilities feeling to receive gifts and to have our needs met. Now, it's kind of odd to say that guilt is good. Like somehow the feeling of guilt would be something I would actually want to be aware of and even want to embrace. It seems like guilt will be the kind of thing I really don't want to have much to do with. We're going to show you that when we can actually be aware of the feeling of guilt, it will move us downstream toward the gift of freedom and the need that we have, which is forgiveness. And if we can't be aware of that feeling, if it is something we have to push down, deny, get away from, defend against, that's a big one about guilt. We defend against our guilt. It does move us into the impairment that we'll talk about called self-condemnation. In some ways, there's power in me condemning myself rather than just being guilty, being forgiven. So, because I remember when I, again, go back to this one, not for me, and this is when I first was getting to know Phil, and Phil's part of this journey with me, that I began to thaw. This one around guilt was significant, and it still is. In fact, I'd say one of the greater gifts of all 8 and being aware of has come in this territory of being able to feel and own my guilt. Again, shame was, I'm human, I have gifts to bring, and there's things I don't have. And so I have contempt for my humanity or contempt for my limitations. Guilt is very different because guilt, the impairment of guilt is I condemn myself for having crossed the line, done something wrong. Phil will explain that. But I remember when I was early on this journey, I was beginning to wake up to some of the ways that I had really, really harmed some people that I was working with in a context of a team that I was leading. And I remember spending a pretty significant period of time, and I had some guy helping me. He was actually my sponsor in the 12-step program, was helping me be very specific about the ways that I had caused damage in some of these relationships. And I spent a couple months actually just writing stuff out. These are things that I knew I was going to have to own. And so what I did was I made a list of people that I needed to go to make an amends to. And what I remember is I just scheduled meetings. I think for a period of 2 weeks straight, I was almost every day for several hours a day meeting with somebody. And I would always enter it this way. I would enter that meeting. I would say, look, and I was just learning how to do this. That's amazing. I'm in my 40s. I was learning how to do this. I would say, look, I came to meet with you because I'm here to ask for your forgiveness for some things. I'm owning some guilt. But before I do that, I want you to tell me what it was like working with me. I want you to express to me what those things were so that when I ask you forgiveness, when we're all done, you'll know what I'm asking you to let go of to grant me that forgiveness. So there can be some healing in our relationship. And some of those meetings were 10 minutes. Some of them were hours. And I remember sitting down with one guy in particular. And man, I remember we had 2 chairs, like knee to knee almost in his living room, 2 like chairs from his kitchen. We're sitting here like this. And this was one of those ones that went several hours. And I'm sitting there with this guy. And man, I said, so-and-so, I said, tell me how I've hurt you or harmed you or what my relationship has been like with you over the last several years. And man, he pulled up the dump truck and stuff just started coming out. And I'm sitting there and it kept coming. Like I'm standing under the Niagara Falls of offense. And I'd asked for this, but it was much more than I was expecting. In fact, I'd known this guy for a long time, and I was like the third in line of like really strong leaders that this guy had worked for. And at one point, I found myself getting a little bit defensive inside, thinking, wait a minute, that was that guy that did that. Or, no, I know the guy before me that, and the problem was I was the first guy in line for this particular guy that had stopped long enough to own some things. And I knew I was getting my dump truck, his dump truck, and his dump truck. And I knew it in the moment. And there were times I was wanting to defend myself internally, like, wait a minute, that wasn't me, or wasn't that bad, or whatever. But here's what happened. He's bringing me all this stuff that I was going to own. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm sitting this close to him. And I caught myself. And I just stopped, and I sat in it. And I said, I don't really have to defend anything. I can hear it. And as this guy was talking, And I don't know if I've ever had an experience like this. It's almost like I could visually see a cross behind his head.
Mm.
And he would say some stuff, and then I would sit there and I would lean in. And I said, would you say more about that? And the more he said, the bigger that cross grew behind him. And what I kept hearing from the Lord is that there is nothing that you're going to own here that I haven't taken care of for you. There is no amount of guilt that you're going to apologize for, that what I did for you on this cross hasn't taken care of. And I found myself, the more I owned internally, the more I could hear him, the more I let him pour out on me all that hurt and offense, this cross just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm weeping now in front of this guy. He thinks I'm crying over my hurting him, which there was probably some of that, but mostly I was crying over the tenderness of God to me, that the cross was sufficient. And I didn't have to nit and pick about what was mine, what was his, what was 80% mine. That's too much. That wasn't enough. I remember just kind of like, I can own what I did, and I can own more than what I did. I can own the 3 guys that he worked for before he worked for me, because there's enough grace for me in all of it. And the more I can own, truthfully, the more grace I receive.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget that, because the feeling of guilt, even some guilt that I didn't have to own, but the feeling of it, the experience of it, actually led not just to the need I had, which was forgiveness. I had legitimate need for forgiveness, but I was stunned by the freedom that I got up and walked out of that room with. And in some ways, this is so crazy. I was the offender in that relationship, but in some ways, I walked out of that interaction with him freer than he was. In fact, years later, someone confronted him, a mutual friend confronted him about his resentment and bitterness toward me that was hanging on like a decade or more later.
Mm.
And he came to me and made an amends to me for how resentful and bitter he'd been toward me through the whole thing. And the truth was, I was freer for all that time.
Yeah.
But it was the gift and the need that comes from actually the feeling of guilt. And I know that was a big story, but that's true in every little story. That it's a real gift to be aware of something I need to own, and then the freedom and the ability to not have to minimize, to actually ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, that is a big story. It's a big story in several ways. It was longer than normal than we've done here, and it's a big story.
Yeah.
Because it really does picture, Jeff, especially the part around how free you were. And I know this story, and I know you don't mean like, gosh, I got a better deal than he did.
No.
You mean like, man, the freedom I experience is so commensurate with the amount of offense, and maybe even more. So that's a beautiful thing about guilt. It is the word itself, like you started with, like, I just want to go, oh, no, not guilt. And it is so key. It's so important. You did this literally knee to knee with a guy, several guys. And sometimes it's not that dramatic, or maybe not even in person, but guilt is this God-induced feeling, not for our condemnation, but for recognition that not only can I produce harm or cause harm to someone else, I have done it.
Yeah.
And God in his grace actually says, you're guilty of sin. And with every conviction, God gives an invitation. And so the invitation of guilt is to experience the freedom that you were just talking about, Jeff. And here's what happens. If I've committed sin or offense or harm to someone, and I know I've done that, and I don't admit it, I don't confess it, I don't seek that type of conversation you had, then I walk around with a secret. And there's fewer things in the world that will put a person in bondage more deeply than a secret. And so the reason it's stated that the gift of guilt is freedom is because when I confess that, the secret's out. It's in the light of day. I don't have to carry it all by myself anymore, which does open the door for my need of forgiveness. And this is a great example of that, Jeff. God guarantees us immediate forgiveness. Like, ask him, receive. Like, he's ready for that. Humans are many times slower. And like, I have committed offense against my friend Jeff. I've harmed my friend Jeff. I keep it a secret for a while or don't admit it. And finally I do. And God says, you are forgiven of the harm you've done to another image bearer named Jeff. And Jeff may be slower. Jeff may say, I just don't think I can yet. And sometimes he can, which is great when I experienced that. You said a key word a few minutes ago, Jeff, that is so important to understand the joy and invitation of guilt, and it's the word self-condemnation. It's a preemptive strike in our guilt. Rather than admit that guilt, we'll strike preemptively and say, hey, God, other person, you can't condemn me because I condemn myself already. And so I'm already there. And so guilt can be a very powerful reinforcer to stay in the dark because not only have I committed offense, I've kept that offense a secret. Even if other people know it, I haven't admitted it out loud. And I get to condemn myself and play the role of God. And so this powerful story that you and I write about in the Bible study of David, who committed adultery with Bathsheba and framed her husband to be essentially murdered in war. And David writes in Psalm 32, like when I was silent, my bones wasted away. And as we write and discovered and working on that chapter of the Bible study, it means his essence, his Davidness was eking out of his body because he was not admitting the guilt that he had committed, the harm he had caused. And so guilt is really a grace. Guilt is almost like there's an awaiting reservoir of grace, and the admission of guilt is the way I get to have it. God has it positionally, but when I've committed offense and harm, I walk into that grace through my admission of guilt. It's so important that we humans and we Christians in the body of Christ do that with one another, both in the admission of guilt to say, I have caused harm, and in the hearing of that and forgiving when I can.
I've even found there's freedom in what some in a 12-step program will call a living amends, where I've had situations with my children or even other people, adults, friends of mine. My kids are adults now too, but where I've already asked for forgiveness. Mm-hmm. I've experienced that. They've granted it. But I can still grieve, be sad, or still have feelings later about the fact that something happened. And I'll bring something up every now and then with even one of my daughters, and I'll say, hey, I know you don't remember that, and I know we've dealt with this, but you need to know I still think about that, and I'm still sad about it. And I'm even still sorry of how that impacted you. Now, that doesn't mean I'm seeking forgiveness again. It does mean I'm continuing to show up with her so she can keep healing over something that was very damaging.
Yes.
But I find that the gift of that is that I don't have to avoid that internal intuition about myself or about something or to see what I did, and that I don't have to look away from it. The other byproduct is this, I think. If you think about it, we can't offer anyone else anything that we ourselves don't have.
Yeah.
So the more that I have the capacity to receive forgiveness, which really comes with me asking, I come. If I can receive forgiveness, it's incredible how that impacts my other relationships when someone comes to me and needs me to forgive them. I can give them what I've received.
That's right. That's
which is
exactly
forgiveness.
Right. And you hit on something important. It really goes with all the feelings, but guilt and hurt are two that this goes with. You mentioned you'll sometimes go back to your children, your daughters in particular. And here's something that the brain does with trauma. The brain lives with an ongoing fear that the one who harmed me will forget I've been harmed. And so sometimes that's the reason sometimes people come back and bring up, and people will say, why do you keep bringing that up? Well, what's happening is internally, I've recognized I don't want him or her to forget what they've done and do this to me again. But that preemptive strike, as we said about self-condemnation, that's the opposite of that. You go to that person, not out of toxic shame or some other reason other than to say, I want you to know I remember, I was thinking of you, I love you, that came up, and I want you to know that. I still remember.
Yeah. And that actually helps kind of connect us, helps them heal, but also they know that they matter.
Yes.
And then I haven't forgotten. I haven't forgotten. And somehow that helps both of us.
It helps both of us. It's mutuality in relationships. And so guilt is this beautiful invitation, though it doesn't feel like it.
Doesn't feel like
Guilt
it.
is an invitation to grace. Guilt is an invitation to reconciliation. Guilt is an invitation to personal ownership through confession to really be able to walk in freedom. Very important.